Welcome to our college planning seminar, AI, Admission, and You. Thank you for joining us. And I am here with my good friend, Rick Clark. Thanks for being here, Rick. There he is.
Thanks for having me.
And we are going to be doing this. It's a new time and a new night. And we're going to be doing these college planning seminars once a month and dialing down on a specific issue. We still are going to have our Ask Us Anything Thursday nights once a month, but these will be more focused like today with AI, Admission, and You. And if you're just joining us, please go ahead and put in the chat where you're zooming in from and whether you're a student or a counselor or a parent. If you're a student or parent, kind of what grade you're entering into. And while you do that, we have asked ChatGPT to introduce our esteemed guest tonight. In 100 words or less, we asked for ChatGPT to do an introduction. And so, Rick, I want you to grade this here. It says, with over 20 years of experience in enrollment management, Rick Clark has served as Assistant Vice Provost and Executive Director of Undergraduate Admission at Georgia Tech since 2000. He provides strategic vision and oversees initiatives to recruit exceptional students. Under Mr. Clark's leadership, Georgia Tech has achieved record growth in application volume, academic quality, and diversity within the student body. He leverages technology and data analytics to streamline admissions and identify promising students. Mr. Clark is dedicated to access and inclusion, garnering recognition for recruitment strategies focused on underrepresented populations in STEM fields.
I like it. That's pretty good. I mean, if we're grading it, are we using what's our scale here? I mean, are we traditional?
We're doing a mastery scale. So you either mastered or no. It's we're gonna go on an A through B or a B through F.
Yeah. So I mean, I'll go with an A there. I mean, and that's a non-inflated A.
Man, I'm going with a solid C plus because
Okay.
it didn't even mention you're an author of a book and you have a podcast.
True.
And, I mean, come
Good
on.
point. That's true. That's true. Well, we both know though it'd be impossible for anything to do yours in 100 words, so we won't pick it apart too much.
Well, nor did it mention that you have 2 children and a lovely wife and are a endurance athlete and all kinds of other stuff. But we'll save that for another time. So thanks for joining us. We're really going to dig in and we would love for folks to just kind of go in and throw in your questions in the Q&A about AI and admission. A bunch came through registration, so we'll get to those. But let's just start, Rick, with kind of how are you thinking at Georgia Tech about artificial intelligence and how it interfaces with admission?
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is certainly one of those places around the country where AI, is in the water, so to speak, with the work that we do, our professors. I mean, the IBM Watson came out of Georgia Tech. And so this concept of utilizing artificial intelligence is certainly not new to us. But as it relates specifically to admission, it certainly is, because the advent of, really accessible and I would say ubiquitous AI tools really didn't occur until the end of last year's cycle. I don't think really most students were kind of waking up and using that a whole lot until our application at least had already passed. And so to just kind of quickly summarize, I would say we're thinking of it as an opportunity for students to get some ideas out quickly and refine some of what they'd like to say, maybe throw out multiple ideas so that they can just kind of react to it. And in the way that you and I might have a conversation and have had many conversations about our thoughts. And it's good to have something bouncing back. And often students don't have that. So I'm really pretty pro AI. And so at Georgia Tech, our staff too, over time has really kind of come to that same position.
And so for students, students are I think a lot of students are thinking, how much do I dive in? Like, where's the line?
Mm-hmm.
How do we as educators and how do students think about kind of that kind of moving target of that line between what's ethical use of it and what's unethical?
Yeah. Well, certainly I think colleges, I mean, a lot of this is incumbent upon colleges to be clear about the expectations that they have for students, whether they have a specific policy, let's say, where on their supplemental questions, they're saying they don't want students to use it, or in the case of a Georgia Tech, saying, here's how we would like you to think about it. So we're issuing guidance, not a policy. What we're saying is, you've heard way more people than I have over the years, and probably on these interviews through CGN say, we just want to hear your voice. We just want to hear your voice. And that's a tough charge to a 17-year-old. I really think that is almost unfair. What is my voice? And these students are paranoid. What do they want to read? And what should I write about? And all of this. And so, I think that for us, it's more of, we're trying to give guidance to say, putting out an initial ChatGPT response is not going to be a really solid admission essay. But it does show you what your voice is not. And I think that that's really positive for students, because you throw any subject in and look at what comes back, and you're like, there's pieces of that are valuable. And there's a lot of that I want to put my own spin on. And I think that that is really a great stride forward for students who get very concerned about the essay, as you well know.
Well, and this isn't any different really from what's always happened, right? I mean, I've always had students come to me over the years saying, my parent or a teacher or somebody has kind of over edited my essay, and this doesn't really sound like me anymore. So students already know when it's not their voice, right?
Yep.
And so, like you said, maybe it's tough for them to kind of articulate what their voice is, but they know what it's not. And they've always
100%.
identified that, and that's true with AI.
I agree. Absolutely.
So what are your thoughts? So, I mean, I've been encouraging students to use it as a brainstorming tool. At Khan Lab School, we use Khanmigo, which is the chatbot through Khan Academy. But, ChatGPT and Bard, I mean, I would actually be interested to hear from the audience, if you want to put in the chat, what different AI platforms are you using as you kind of explore this, or as you work with students, or if you're a student yourself or parent. Go ahead and put in the chat what are you using ChatGPT, or using Bard, or using Khanmigo, or using something else. It would just be interesting to see that. But so I've been encouraging students to use it for brainstorming, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like you said, just kind of throwing ideas back and forth. What are your thoughts about using AI to provide feedback on students' essays? Right? Like, so students kind of putting it in and saying, proofread this for me and give me some feedback. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest with you, I haven't tried it that way too much. But I think that it would be interesting. I mean, for instance, take the introduction that you did for me. If I were to have generated that myself, if I was handing it, a lot of times I'll go and do a talk or whatever, and somebody will ask for an introduction. I think submitting something like that and saying, okay, what have I left out, or what else might I put here, or is there a stronger way to start this? Absolutely. I mean, again, we know that many students have access to people around them, humans in their house, in their community, some of which they're paying for, some of which they're paying for through the school that they go to. This is not a level field. This isn't necessarily leveling the playing field, but it is giving students a little bit of a additional tool, additional resource that they might not have had before, especially for students like that who are in a school that has a 300-to-1 student teacher ratio, who are looking at a blinking cursor and are totally not sure how to get started.
Yeah, I think there's been so much fixation on the essay in the media around AI. It's just telling about how much energy gets thrown into the essay just in general.
Yeah.
But what we haven't really looked at is kind of how AI can be helpful in other parts of the application, or other parts of the college search,
Yeah.
right? And that's what I think we're missing, because I was playing with it this weekend a bit, and I just went into ChatGPT and asked for a list of schools that I think I put in. I'm interested in applied math, and I want a mock trial team, and I'm looking for a school in the Northeast with an acceptance rate between 30%, or 20% and 40%. And man, if it didn't give me like a really good list,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
And a little blurb on each school and why it was what it was known for related to my prompt. And
Yeah.
so, I think we're fools if we're not using that to really dial in and kind of create things on the starting end of the funnel.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I mean, you earlier mentioned, the book that we wrote together. And, we're talking constantly in that. I know both of us talk a lot in our writing about trying to just give students a bigger perspective and some things to think about and questions to ask. And unfortunately, not all students have, again, that sounding board that is in the form of an actual person, or they're just they love them, but they're just not as available as maybe they were. They don't have experience in that way. But to your point, that list of schools, look, it's not like, it's kind of like what we're talking about with the essays. You don't just like submit a topic, let it generate once, copy and paste that and submit it to a college. That's not a good idea. It's not going to be a compelling essay. It's not really going to get you very far. Similarly, the list that you generated, all that's doing is saying, I'm not going to just like take that at face value, but it gets me going and it gets me looking into some of these schools and then saying, well, what other schools are like X, Y, or Z? And for students, I just think that is invaluable because it's giving them the opportunity to think more broadly than any of us as humans naturally do.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And if you're just joining us, please put your questions in the Q&A. I know there's some things in the chat, trying to kind of keep everything straight here. So please put some questions in the Q&A and we can have Rick address them. Another thing, Rick, I want to, there's a bunch of counselors here tonight and a bunch of questions came in through the registration about using AI with recommendations, for writing recommendations. And I think some students too, and parents wonder, like, if my counselor is using a AI platform to write recommendations, and is that going to hurt my student? Can you talk a little bit about kind of how you're thinking about that?
Yeah. So with the recommendations, I've used it recently to write a recommendation letter for one of my staff members who's applying for a grad program. And, I mean, a lot of times what I have is a couple stock letters that I will go to and then start there and start to like kind of put in some of this person's specifics and then look at the program and try to tailor it. And the truth is, if you lined several of mine up, they wouldn't be all that different. But they're definitely specific and unique to that particular person. I think that recommendations is a place where counselors, I've been saying, and I put I don't know if it's in the show or in your show notes or not, but I did like a 3-part series for juniors, counselors, and seniors about how to use AI. And I think what counselors should consider doing is A/B testing. I know people don't have a whole lot of time, but write a counseling recommendation letter from scratch, and then try one through ChatGPT by regenerating it maybe 3 times. And look, I mean, I know you have a daughter who's a senior in high school. I have a daughter who's a 7th grader and a son who's a 9th grader. And I think anybody on this call would say there's never been a more important time for loving, caring humans to be walking the halls and available to our kids. And, if AI can help counselors write solid recommendations, never perfect, and they're never going to be, but solid recommendations in half the time, a quarter of the time, and be more available to kids, then I am 100% for it.
And all you want is the information anyway, right? You're not looking for some well-written counselor, perfectly phrased and everything like that. You want to get to know the student.
Yeah.
So so there's a question about, and kind of let's pivot a little, and because I think this is also on people's minds about how colleges are going to be using AI to review applications and
Okay.
make decisions. And I know it's still kind of in process. A lot of schools are still trying to figure that out. How are you all thinking about that? What are you hearing?
Yeah. So I have heard from several colleagues around the country who either have been over the last couple of years or this year starting to pilot essentially AI running next to human reviewers. And so, for instance, essentially, they are going to be using it to help them norm or help them see where there's great variance. So that's more on the machine learning side. they're feeding their rubrics into the AI tool. It's running next to the reader. The person puts in their scoring of the extracurriculars or of the essay, and then they can look either in real time or do periodic checks, right? And we do this throughout the course of our cycle where we'll pause and we'll do some norming to see if people are at variance. And I think this is going to really help to check bias. I think it's going to help to keep the staff more on rubric. And it's going to flag things more quickly to get things back in line if they're veering off. So that's one thing. I do think that over a couple of years of training this, you will start to see AI making some decisions that humans later check. And that probably sounds scary to some on the call, but the truth is we do this with 25-year-old first-year readers too, right? Where we check on their stuff just as well. So, when these schools, yeah.
Well, I was just gonna say, and the difference is the AI is not, tired late at night reading applications and making mistakes and things like that, right?
Yep, I'm with you on that for sure.
So there's a question that came in about how to, well, first of all, are there examples of admission departments using AI to evaluate applicants? I don't know that you want to share.
Right. Yeah, I think that I would leave that to individual institutions to talk about it. But let me just say, if schools are, I think they should be really forthright about that.
Yeah, I mean, we had Matt Lopez from ASU on a couple weeks ago, and he was very frank about the fact that they use it, right?
Yeah.
And I think, when you talk about using AI, there's a difference between making decisions and, like you said, using an admission, because lots of schools have been using it to do predictive modeling and enrollment management type stuff for years.
And like, here's a good example of something that, I think about with AI. One of the things Georgia Tech does is we as people go into transcripts and we pull out a student's highest math and then their senior math. And we literally are using like drop downs to indicate that, so that when we read a student's file, it's all the things that we've scored, including their math progression. AI should be able to do that for us. We should not have to be going in there and determining a student's, calculus level or whatever. Some of these people that are, asking students, and I know you've talked about this a lot, like the self-reported academic records and how there's so many different ones. We can get AI, I think, to the point where it can do that, and you don't have to put the burden on counselors or students. And I think that'll be a real positive as well.
So the question, and I'll just mention, you earlier, you talked about your series for counselors and students. That was in your Georgia Tech admission blog. And it was, I think, titled, "Can We Chat GPT?" Right? So people should check that out. Maybe we can put it in the chat. But Tracy asks, how can I, as a counselor, equip my students to appeal to the quote unquote admission bot, right? If and this is always the question, right? Like if AI is reading applications, how do students are going to want to know? Okay, so how do I get inside their head, right? Just like they've always know how to get inside.
You don't have to get inside their head. You have to go to their website and see what they're saying they put value on in their essays. And this is what I've been talking to colleagues about around the country. All this does is it basically makes you determine, why are you asking for an essay to begin with? What is it you're looking for? And is your rubric aligned with that? Because look, I can tell you for Georgia Tech, I mean, you can, and people can go to our site. I mean, we're really clear about what we're looking for in the writing, and it's about details, and it's about specifics, and it's about, conveying essentially why it is that you want to study a certain major at Georgia Tech. That rubric does not change. The question is not changing, and the rubric behind it is not changing. And that means that in many cases, a chat GPT essay is going to be like, and we don't grade them, by the way. Like, we don't, like you said earlier with the introduction, we don't do it that way. But we do look through a rubric to determine, like, is this helping a student? Is this a neutral factor, or is this a negative? And I think chat GPT can generate a lot of neutral factors, a lot of neutral essays.
Yeah. Well, and so are you or other schools using, I think one of the concerns from students is colleges using kind of spyware or programs to see if students are using ChatGPT,
Yeah.
and they're worried that maybe their essay will get flagged as ChatGPT, even though it's not, and all that kind of thing. What's your sense for that?
So I think that if you have an institution that's doing its homework and done its due diligence to even have anything public facing about this, they've pretty quickly found in talking to experts that right now, for where we are, this concept of what you're describing, reverse AI, is a fool's errand, that you get too many false positives. There may come a time where that's possible. And to be honest with you, that's where I started. I really started first in talking to the Common App back in February to say, will you have something in the Common App that basically says to a student on their side before they submit it? It appears that 81% of this has been AI generated. Are you sure you want to submit that? And I'm not going to say they laughed at me. They were definitely like, no. And and the more I've talked to experts and the more I've listened and read, from experts, what they say is you cannot trust that. And so I'm sincerely hopeful that schools aren't going to be trying to do that, because everything I hear and read says not possible.
There's a great question that came in here. It sounds like AI will speed up the reading process. Do you see deadlines changing because of this, particularly the admit deny date and maybe eventually the May 1st candidate
Yeah.
reply date? Do you see that
Well,
happening?
I don't know. I mean, here's what I'm hopeful for. Maybe, and that would be great. This year, of course, we have new FAFSA, and that's going to delay the financial aid return. But if we could put out decisions quicker, you could actually get kids financially packaged quicker. And that would be, I think, good for everybody, because then they're sitting there with real offers of money and admission. But honestly, a little of that goes back to what we were talking about, flipping it from the high school classrooms and the high school hallways of having counselors more available. I think this is really positive. I mean, where I want to get for Georgia Tech is we spend too much time reading. We spend too much time in review. And many schools, and you probably could rattle off some, they don't answer their phones. They're slow on getting back on email. I mean, we can get people more available. We can get people who are doing higher touch with students. And I really feel like now, for a variety of reasons, Supreme Court being one of them, there's never been a more important time for admission folks to do admission and not constantly be doing review.
And you and I have talked about this kind of, how can we make it from transactional to transformational, right? Or transformative. I mean, how can we use AI to take out that transactional piece?
Yeah.
And I think the concern is also about, so there's a question here about Facebook and TikTok and Instagram and social media. Will AI be used to evaluate that? Do you see any kind of like using AI to scrub social media? I mean, most colleges are already not looking at social media.
Right.
So I don't see that happening writ large.
I would agree. I do think that's what AI does well. It scrapes well. So if you wanted to try to program to go out and pull a student's social media presence or footprint or content, I guess that is what it does well. I don't see that being something that schools are going to waste their time doing. And I've always said I'm really proud of the fact that I don't take any of my time to look at a 17-year-old social media information.
Yeah. Just going back to the dates, for example, the one thing this could do that I'd love to see it do is, if it's simplifying the reading process and condensing things, then maybe we can do away with early action and early decision, right? Because we don't need to stretch out the process. You and I have had lots of conversations about that, but
that would be great. Yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Oh, well, I was just going to say, I mean, I think the other thing is, and we touched on this a second ago, but the essay, why do we have an essay anyway? And is the day of the essay done? Maybe because of AI and maybe for other reasons, but I mean, and I'm sure you are way beyond me, but I'm kind of sick of hearing admission people say, we just want to hear your voice. We just want to hear your voice, when there's a way to actually hear their voice. Like the essay really might not be the best way. You are hearing my actual voice right now. This is not that hard. A kid could voice record or video submit something where it is their literal voice. And to me, that's far more valuable because, as I said earlier, we don't score and grade essays. That's not what we're not sitting there. Like I'm much more dependent on your transcript to tell me if a kid can write than a 650 word essay that could have, as you said earlier, been highly polished and edited by someone.
Right. Let's hear from the student.
Yeah.
Yep, I'm all for that. So a bunch of questions starting to come in. Of course, as we get right towards the 7:30 hour, let's jump into a couple of them. Is there any hope that leaning on AI as a review tool will allow more colleges to conduct one-on-one interviews?
I think it's possible. I think kind of what I just described. I mean, whether they're going one-on-one or whether they are, I mean, you and I have seen a couple tools demoed where a student gives, or you know, maybe even in this meeting for you and I, like, it takes the voice, it takes the recording, it runs it through a program, and it says that Brennan's language is 80% positive, and here are some words that he commonly uses, and this is how that may indicate his character. And if you're looking for certain qualities, and this is what that program is essentially showing, you know, then that kind of thing is absolutely possible. So yeah, I think that is not in the too distant future.
Right. And it might not be one-on-one interviews with a human, but they might be doing specific kind of responding to an AI chatbot, and relative AI is doing a lot of that stuff. And
Right.
we talked about on the podcast about you know, this idea of maybe even doing group interviews, like have students do kind of a seminar and do some collaborative work, and then have AI kind of assess that. There's all kinds of opportunities that I think we need to kind of stay tuned into over the next couple of years.
Oh, for sure. I mean, and that's why a lot of schools started going to interviewing students who English wasn't their first language because, and Georgia Tech is among them, we wanted to see or get a sense of how they would interact, you know, and maybe conduct themselves in a classroom setting. And that was in a one-on-one unscripted interview through Initial View. And you know, to your point, maybe there's a better way to do that kind of thing, as you said, in a setting like this where there's multiple people. Hey, we want to simulate it. We were trying to solve for it. Like, let's lean into technology and allow it to do that for us.
Right. So there's a comment here about the SAT and ACT, and if we do away with essays, for example, or AI is taking more of a role, is that going to put more emphasis on test scores?
You know, I mean, I think this is one of those things where right now, I think we've hit an inflection point with SAT and ACT in terms of the test optional or test free / test blind. I don't see AI bringing tests back in a significant way. Where, yes, it's coming back here spotty with various schools around the country. Some of that's driven by their own institutional data. Some of that's driven by legislators and you know, regents and people like that. But I don't see AI being the catalyst to a reemergence of the SAT or ACT.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. Let's see, what do we have here? How do we discourage students from overusing AI? And how do schools kind of determine that?
Yeah, here's what I would do if I was a counselor in a high school. I'd have a parent program, or I'd record it, and I would do a live generation of an essay, you know, and pick a topic, throw it in there. And you know, it's the year that my basketball team won the state championship, and I hit the final shot, and everybody went crazy. And here's what the coach said to me on the bus afterwards, or whatever, and generate that essay for me. And you throw it up there, and what you're going to get is a pretty robotic response that's grammatically perfect and is not going to line up then with what a college is saying they're really looking for. I mean, and that's what I think I would do. I'd have the generated response, and I'd have a school's statement of what they're looking for. And I would say, how do you feel like this is going to score? What a lot of professors of computer science say is ChatGPT and Bard and some of these others can do very B-ish level work. But if, you know, if you're going for compelling and if you're going for impactful, then that's really not going to do it for you. So find a start, find a brainstorm, find to iterate and edit, but you need to move that over into its own form and make it yours.
That's a great point. And that kind of speaks to this question that came in about, what kind of programs can counselors promote the use of AI to students? Do you have recommendations on workshops or tutorials we can offer students to help with this stressful time of their lives?
Yeah.
And it's just kind of what you're saying. Maybe we should take our show on the road, Rick, and
Yeah.
and offer it to high schools. I mean, I think the this idea of kind of walking students through as a class through ways that they can engage with both in the search and in the application experience is just huge and huge time saving for everyone.
I was going to say the same thing. I mean, it's not like when you were talking about generating your list earlier from AI of the various factors that you described, it's not like you would only do that, but man, you did that so fast. So like you can do that and other things. And this is where I'm bullish on AI for counselors, for students, and for colleges is time is our most valuable commodity. And if we can get to what we feel good about faster, why does it have to be a gauntlet, man? Why does it have to be so hard? Like if I can get a kid from spending 4 days to 4 hours on an essay, I'm okay with that because all the other things that we are working on or that they've been submitting to us, I don't need to make this some pain point for them.
Right. And I will just, because somebody's asking here, I'm just going to do a quick screen share because somebody's asking about how when I was talking about the search I was doing earlier. So how to do that in ChatGPT. And literally, I just said in ChatGPT, can you suggest some schools with this criteria? And here's what it spat out, right? So it's that easy. I mean, it's, you just ask it what you put in your criteria, what the specific things are, and it will make suggestions.
Here's another one you can put in, and Brennan, you can do it now if you want to, or people can do it themselves. But, hey, can you help me to complete the activities section of the Common App? And it is really interesting because it basically like, first of all, it's super friendly, right? It's like, sure, I'd be happy to help you. And then it starts to say like, here's what you're going to find. You need to log into the Common App. Here's, what you're going to do next. Here's kind of, how to be descriptive. So, it's like a 10-step process that, again, some kids have some kids have super involved parents, but some kids have this, man. And this is pretty helpful.
It's pretty helpful. Yeah. And we're living, like as we've talked about before, we're living in this age of information overload where it's tough to kind of find out where to look and this, you need to verify that what you're looking at is indeed accurate, right?
Right.
But that's true with anything.
That's right.
Hey, Rick, thanks for chatting through this with us, and we really appreciate everyone joining us tonight.